All right, so Kamala Harris appeared at George Mason University the other day to have a discussion with some of the students at this university, and one of them asked Kamala Harris a question that you would almost never hear a mainstream press outlet ask of a vice president, and it was pretty interesting to hear Kamala Harris's response. Honestly, not surprising. She basically gave a complete non-answer, and it's really emblematic of exactly why I hate Kamala Harris as a politician in the way that she speaks. But this is a really good question, so let's go ahead and listen to this student who is pressing Kamala Harris, unlike the mainstream media will ever do, on the issue of funding Israel and Saudi Arabia and other human rights abusers.
But I see that over the summer there have been protests and demonstrations in astronomical numbers standing with Palestine, but then just a few days ago there were funds allocated to continue backing Israel, which hurts my heart because it's an ethnic genocide and the displacement of people, the same that happened in America, and I'm sure you're aware of this. And I bring this up also because of the issue of how Americans are struggling because of lack of health care, public health care, lack of affordable housing, and all this money ends up going to in funding Israel and backing Saudi Arabia and whatnot. And I think that the people have spoken very often in what they do need, and I feel like there's a lack of listening, and I just feel like I need to bring this up because it affects my life and people I really care about's lives, and this is just something I had to bring up.
I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. And again, this is about the fact that your voice, your perspective, your experience, your truth should not be suppressed.
What? What? Your truth cannot be suppressed? What the fuck are you talking about? She just asked a massively substantial question to Kamala Harris, right? She said, listen, over the summer, and as we saw in back in May, if you need a reminder on it, we had 256 Palestinians who were killed in the bombing of Gaza. That was, again, in response to protests that Palestinians were protesting against illegal expansions of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, as well as protesting the storming of the Al-Aqsa Mosque that Israeli security forces were doing as well on the holiest night of Islam. So she's pointing out that over this last summer, we saw incredible brutality from the state of Israel. And why are we giving them money? That was her question, right? Why are we having politicians like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden tell us that we can't afford to give healthcare to every single citizen with a policy like Medicare for all, while simultaneously they're going and passing resolutions, as they did last week, to give $1 billion more to fund Israel's ethnic cleansing against Palestinian people? That's the situation that she was just describing, and she was entirely correct and accurate. And if you need a refresher on exactly what Israel is doing to Palestinians, we'll hear from Human Rights Watch again. I'll link this down in the description below. Israel is an apartheid state, okay? We've known this for some time, whether it's in their policies of how their judicial system is functioning, whether it's in the illegal Israeli settlements where Palestinians are forcibly displaced from their homes that they have lived in for decades and decades, and Israeli settlers illegally move in. Again, these are illegal under international law, right? UN urges Israel to immediately halt settlement expansion. These are completely illegal, as you see here. Settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories are regarded as illegal under international law and by much of the international community, and between 600,000 and 750,000 Israeli settlers live in more than 250 illegal settlements, 130 official and 120 unofficial, in the occupied Palestinian territories. And again, just another reminder on the actual casualties and the power difference and the military difference in their capabilities between Palestine and Israel. Here's the death toll, okay? Here from Forbes: the cost of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Israeli and Palestinian deaths and injuries documented by the UN. And as you can see here from the overall numbers, from 2008 to 2020, 5,590 officially recorded deaths on the Palestinian side and 251 on the Israeli side. Obviously, no civilian deaths are ever a good thing in any way stretch of the imagination, but the point of pointing out this giant power discrepancy is to get people to understand that the military of Israel, which is backed by the largest and most powerful military in history in the United States, which again is giving them military equipment, as we just did with the $1 billion in funding that was not actually going to their Iron Dome, was instead going to weapons that they could potentially use against Palestinians. But this is the power differential, okay? Hamas and all of these other groups within Palestinian territories that are trying to push back against this military occupation, they have nowhere close to the power that Israel does in a military capacity. So even calling this a conflict is complete nonsense. But this is the situation that this girl was describing and asking Kamala Harris, an entirely fair question. Why are we supporting, whether it's through military aid, whether it's through direct funding, as we saw with that $1 billion, why are we giving them money to go and conduct an ethnic cleansing, a genocide of the Palestinian people? And Kamala Harris's response is literally, your voice, your perspective, your experience. They cannot be suppressed. That's what Kamala Harris responded to that. Okay, so this is exactly why I despise a politician like Kamala Harris. Okay, entirely vapid, no substance, completely dodges the question, has no actual ability or the balls to address this actual a seriously controversial issue, right? You could say, and she's not even willing to go and take a stake one way or the other. You could disagree with this student and say, no, I actually am in favor of supporting Israeli apartheid and genocide, and you could come out and say that and defend that position if that's actually what your position is, which it is for Kamala Harris and the Joe Biden administration. But she doesn't even have an answer to this. So listen, this just points out the massive failures of our media ecosystem here in the United States. When a student at George Mason University, and I don't know who this student was or if they hold any positions at this university, but this student at the university is asking a question that is more substantive than you would hear from any of our mainstream outlets whenever Kamala Harris makes her public appearances. So listen, these are the types of questions she should be having to answer, and she should actually have to answer them instead of just giving these ridiculous, vapid, non-responses, right? It's completely pathetic. This is the vice president of the United States, right? Has a great deal of power in this country and presumably wants to be the president in 2024 or 2028 or whenever she wants to take up the mantle after Biden. This is somebody who wants to be the president of the United States, and they cannot even ask a simple question from a student.